Overwatch used to be the biggest game in the world. It won Game of the Year, sold millions of copies, racked up hundreds of millions of views on the trailers alone, and they even got Legos made out of it. It also crashed and burned. The worst part is that Overwatch players celebrated it, but somehow, after becoming the worst reviewed game of all time, Overwatch still came back. But to understand why, we have to go back to the beginning. Overwatch is a game made by Blizzard, and you're just gonna have to trust me that used to be a stamp of quality. I'm not gonna spend a lot of time talking about the early development of the game, but here's the Cliff Notes version, because they'll be relevant later. Overwatch started life as an MMO, and then they realized partway through development that just wasn't gonna work. So, what's the strat? They repurposed some of the character designs in a shooter, and somehow that was actually working. So the team started reworking things to be an actual PvP-focused shooter. Now this is a team of mostly MMO devs, so there's probably no way they could make a good shooter, right? Well, it turns out they could actually make a shooter. They showed the game off, and it looked hype. I mean, look at the graphics in the first trailer they showed off. This game looks like it could be quadruple A. Fire character designs, interesting looking gameplay, all the pieces were there to make a cool game. At the time, there weren't 70,000 hero shooters out there. There was just one, Team Fortress 2, and no normies had played that game. They had a beta for Overwatch, and all the people in the beta were super hype. But it was private, so they couldn't show any footage. Finally,
Jeff from the Overwatch team
decided to let the normal masses try the game in a public beta. And the people lost it again. The game was actually fun and fresh. There were a few wonky things, but overall, it was a great experience. When the game came out, it went crazy. I think it's really hard to understand the mania around Overwatch today because gaming is a little different now. Everyone was playing Overwatch, and it was a great, casual, good time. Launch Overwatch just hit a very different audience than what people had expected, especially among shooter players. Before Overwatch, we had basically two camps. You had the casual shooter players, basically console gamers, who played COD, or Halo, or Battlefield, or some combination of the three. You had the hardcore PC shooter players who played Counter-Strike, or a whole other list of games that are basically all dead now. Overwatch struck a chord where both of these groups had something to play, and it brought in a third group as well, Mercy players. No, but seriously, it also brought in a lot of casual players who didn't play shooters otherwise. Early Overwatch is one of those magical gaming experiences that you can never really go back to. People didn't know how to play the game yet, so a lot of the glaring balancing issues or annoying gameplay was hidden beneath the surface. I mean, people were chill with 6 Torbs or 6 Bastions running around, or with McCree. Sorry, we can't say that anymore. With Cassidy being able to just one-shot tanks. The pro meta, put that in quotes because the pro scene was very young at the time. The pro meta was to run 2 Tracers, 2 Winstons, and 2 Luzios. Now, games cannot sustain themselves via hype moments and aura alone, so
Jeff from the Overwatch team
had to come out and limit the game to 1 hero. This Jeff guy, if you're too young or touch too much grass to know this stuff, was the guy in charge of the Overwatch team. He was also a former WoW dev, back when people were proud of that, and he had the pleasure of becoming a D-tier internet celebrity. That's how popular this game was. All this culminated in pretty much the perfect year that a company could ask for. They printed money with loot boxes. In fact, you can thank them. Thank you, Blizzard. Very cool for loot boxes. The loot boxes made more money than selling the game did. And also, because this was 2016, Overwatch cost $40 to play. Anyway, it then went on to win Game of the Year, which is insane for a multiplayer shooter.
Here it is. The Game of the Year at the Game Awards 2016 is Overwatch.
This is the first and last time that this would ever happen. And if this were a regular game, this is where you would ride off into the sunset. And I think that's what the Overwatch team had been planning on. Except the game did so well that it turned into a forever game, aka a live service game. And if you're enjoying the video so far, I'd appreciate it if you liked and subscribed. Anyway, we've mostly covered Rise at this point, outside of maybe loot boxes, but Overwatch was riding high. They settled into a groove, releasing new maps and new heroes. We had some great wins like Doomfist. This hero was so cool. Look at the sauce he had, the combos, the voice lines.
And they say chivalry is dead.
That one was kind of annoying, but the rest were cool. And you had baller maps like Eichenwald. They did shoot a few air balls. Unfortunately, they did actually release Horizon Lunar Colony. I'm sure their thought process was, guys, it's a space map with low gravity. That'll be cool. It was not cool. Also, these heroes were not all created equal. I like Sombra. I think she's always been pretty fun, but it probably wasn't the best idea to release the video game equivalent of a fly. Always buzzing around you, ruins your lunch, and she turns invisible when you get out the fly swatter. Then there were a couple of other characters that they released back-to-back, just like Hitler followed Mussolini. Okay, a bit far, but you get the picture. We'll get to them as we get to the fall. Now, as the years go on, the gaming world started to move away from Overwatch. Not dropping out all at once, but a lot of people just stopped playing over time. Part of that can be attributed to the rise of Battle Royales, my video on this whole era of shooters if you're interested. I know a lot of my friend group transitioned to playing PUBG and other games from Overwatch. But there's also a more natural drop-off. Overwatch stopped being the shiny new toy it once was and started to morph into a competitive shooter.
Why do we have a Sombra?
Sombra, you're garbage. No joke, you're garbage.
Yeah, I'm not sure Sombra's a great call for DPS.
As games go competitive, they start to shed a lot of the casual players and start to turn into something a little more intense and toxic. They get a little toxic in a way. In general, the player base of Overwatch started to get better at the game, and then the balance of the game started to look a little bit more sus. Pair this with the launch of the Overwatch League, which was their big competitive league, and suddenly Overwatch was a truly try-hard game with tons of complexity and an impressive graveyard of unplayable heroes. Overwatch kept releasing new heroes, but they were a little light on balance patches. This was still pretty standard for games of the time, but we were rapidly approaching modern gaming where people aren't cool with the same things being broken for years at a time. Maybe the Overwatch team would move a little differently if they knew they were already passing the golden age of their game. Still, Overwatch was one of the most popular games on PC, and it still got regular updates. There were some big mistakes, but the game was still alive. Every live service game goes through ups and downs. Sure, the pro scene was going through some big problems, but the game was still working. The devs started to balance the game more competitively over time to match the player base. They changed to having role lock, where every team had to have 2 tanks, 2 damage, and 2 supports. Whereas before, it was kind of the Wild West. You could pick whatever you want. This did lead to some problems, like the fact that you might have to wait 30 minutes to get a game on damage. Don't worry, if the queue times are long, you could always just play tank. Now look, there were problems. The game was getting stale in a lot of ways, but it wasn't dead. This was looking like a wane to be followed by a wax later. Then, Blizzard surprised everyone in 2019. They announced Overwatch 2. This was a little surprising. 2019 is pretty much just modern gaming, and we had plenty of other long-running live service games. One thing about these games is that it doesn't really make sense to make a 2. Because what does that even mean? Like, imagine if they released Fortnite 2. That would just sound goofy. However, they said Overwatch 2 was going to be different, because they announced that Overwatch 2 was going to have a ton of PvE. Instead of the sweaty, competitive game Overwatch had turned into, Blizzard was going to make PvE content so you could play your favorite heroes in a more chill environment. You and your teammates fighting against the computer rather than fighting against each other all the time. It'd have tons of missions and content and game modes. It'd be a whole new Overwatch. A whole new Overwatch. So, why did Overwatch fall? How did we get from Game of the Year to here? What was the problem? Maybe people just got bored. I mean, from 2016 to 2023 is 7 years. That's an eternity for a video game. Like, I'm recording this video in 2025. 7 years ago, God of War and Red Dead 2 came out. They aren't exactly spring chickens. So Overwatch just got a little bit long in the tooth, right? Except that's not really the reason. People definitely got tired of the game, and plenty of people dropped it for another reason we'll get to as well. But Overwatch 2, which we'll get to, trust me, did a good job of getting people to give Overwatch another chance. And there weren't any other options. A lot of hero shooters were launched after Overwatch, and pretty much all of them were dead on arrival. Until you know who showed up, but again, we'll get to that later. Overwatch didn't just get too old. They did, however, start releasing some terrorist heroes. Blizzard had a tough problem in Overwatch. These heroes were not made with a competitive game in mind. There's a sizable chunk of the roster whose design I could best describe as tee-hee heroes. They're meant to be goofy or unique designs that might not work well, but they're really fun to a certain audience. You got Torbjorn, Junkrat, Symmetra, Mei, the classic 4 horsemen of throwing your games. But on the other end of the spectrum, you had heroes who were always good. These heroes might not have even been good for most players, but at a high level, they dominated the game. Tracer, Genji, Winston, Lucio, Tracer, definitely Tracer. These heroes were kind of a problem. Blizzard decided the best solution was to release heroes to deal with this. First of all, we had Mussolini, aka Moira. This hero was designed to be baby easy and require no aim. She's also pretty good versus Genji, which is good, because like every casual complained about Genji. It's not like he's a cyborg ninja that got a lot of people to play Overwatch, but even still, Moira, annoying as she is, didn't ruin the game. A lot of people say that Overwatch went wrong with Mussolini's successor herself, Brig. Brigitte is easily the worst designed hero to ever be released in Overwatch. Maybe the worst designed character I've ever seen come out in a game. So Tracer's a problem, right? Tracer's in too many games. You know what the best solution is? Create a character who just invalidates Tracer. Brigitte could combo Tracer down 100-0 with a combo that took no skill. You could figure it out in about 10 seconds. And it was done while holding up her shield, so she was never in danger. Guys, I'm not kidding when I say Tracer overnight went from being one of the most played heroes in the game to MIA in like a week. Brig was technically a support, but she was as hard to kill as a tank, and she did as much damage as a damage hero. Now, Pro Scene took irreparable damage during this time. Overwatch League was in its second season. In Season 1, it was averaging 100k viewers live. I mean, let's pretend there was no body, okay? And Season 2 looked like it could be even bigger. But then people tuned in and saw that no one was playing the damage heroes. All of the coolest heroes in the game, like Genji, Cassidy, Tracer, Widowmaker, they were all missing in action. Instead, everyone was playing Goats Comp, which ran 3 tanks and 3 supports. Instead of this exciting, explosive game that we knew Overwatch as, 2 teams would just mash their faces into each other with no one dying. So a lot of people blame Brig for the fall of Overwatch. I won't lie, it definitely did help. Definitely. But it didn't kill the game. They did eventually get rid of Goats Comp, and the cool heroes came out of hiding. I mean, most of them did anyway. This is why they did the whole roll lock thing, so you have to have 2-2-2. And again, some blame this for Overwatch's downfall, but all of these issues pale in comparison to the real problem, the thing that almost killed Overwatch. Overwatch 2. Overwatch had some problems like we talked about, but overall, it was still an alive game. Then we got the Overwatch 2 trailer. It looked cool, and they released Echo, who's one of the coolest characters in the game. And I'm definitely not biased. And then, nothing happened. Nothing at all. An entire year passed, and no new heroes were released. And no new maps. This is when a lot of people dropped the game, and it couldn't have come at a worse time. Echo, the last hero they released in Overwatch 1, came out in April of 2020. That date, it sounds familiar, like something important happened around then. 2020 was like the biggest year in gaming we've ever seen because of all the shutdowns, and Overwatch basically took the year off. Then 2021 rolled around. As a reminder, we're now 2 years after Overwatch 2 was announced, and we've seen nothing new in an entire year. Now, 1 year after the last hero came out,
Jeff from the Overwatch team,
the guy in charge of Overwatch, left. And then it came out that Blizzard had about a half dozen mini ditties running around. I mean, seriously, I don't understand how half of that was going on at people's job, but whatever. All this combined to be a pretty terrible time in Overwatch's history. This is when the majority of the player base just moved on. Even if there wasn't another hero shooter around, no one wanted to play an extremely stale version of Overwatch that the devs didn't seem to care about. And we had to rename McCree because they... That gets us all the way to 2022. It's been over 2 years with nothing new, and Overwatch 2 is starting to look a lot like it's going to be canceled. As all hope was looking lost, Blizzard ran out to show the world Overwatch 2 again, and to tell us it's coming out this year, 2022. They had over 2 years to work on the game, and they weren't working on Overwatch 1 basically at all. So what did they bring out to show us to justify all that time? First of all, the game was going free to play. I mean, it just makes sense. 6 years had passed since Overwatch 1, and free-to-play games are just the standard for this kind of game. The only weird part is that initially, Blizzard had announced that you would need to buy Overwatch 2 again, even if you had the base game, because the PvE stuff was essentially its own game. That's fine, no one's going to complain about not having to pay for stuff. In the main PvP side of Overwatch, the biggest change was going to be going from 6v6 to 5v5. So instead of 2 tanks, 2 damage, and 2 supports, we were now only going to have 1 tank. The Blizzard team said it was to reduce the chaos in Overwatch, and in some ways that's very fair. I mean, look at what's going on in the average game of Overwatch 1. However, in hindsight, it's actually a lot more because no one wanted to play tanks.
Happy birthday, ABC Feels birthday, man, happy birthday, CXQC Feels birthday, man.
Hope we're rhyme with their
Okay, taking a hero out is a pretty big change, and they reworked every tank in the game. That had to take some time, but what about the rest of it? I mean, again, this is 2.5 years after they announced Overwatch 2, and 2 years of no new heroes. If they had continued with the same pace of new heroes as Overwatch 1, Overwatch 2 should launch with 8 additional heroes. Instead, they were coming out with 3. This math is not mathing. 2.5 years worth of development minimum to come out with some changes that feel like they could have been done in a year. I mean, that PvE stuff must have been taking up a ton of time, right? That's the part that makes Overwatch 2 a sequel, because this other stuff just looks like a big patch for Overwatch. Not a sequel. Well, let's just say Blizzard proved Overwatch still had a long way to fall. PvE, the whole reason they announced for making Overwatch 2, was getting delayed. They assured everyone it was going to come out later, but they felt they needed to get out Overwatch 2 because the old game was just sitting there stagnant. Now, they were right about that part. Finally, in 2022, after letting Overwatch 1 basically die, they released Overwatch 2. Now, surely, this is the rise again, right? Surely, The reaction to the Overwatch 2 launch would be what I would call mixed. On one hand, a lot of people returned to Overwatch because the game actually had new things to do again, and people really liked the new heroes. Okay, people really liked Kiriko, and they tolerated the other two. On the other hand, this didn't feel at all like a sequel. It played very similarly, but contrary to what the devs said, taking one hero out of the game made it more chaotic, not less. But overall, I think you would call the launch of Overwatch 2 to be a success. At least it wasn't a complete failure. All they had to do was hold out until that big PvE launch, and Overwatch would be truly saved. Well, Overwatch 2 kind of went back to business as usual. They've been back to releasing heroes and maps and teasing PvE. This worked alright for a month or two, but people started to get bored again. I mean, there's a lot more options in 2022 than 2016. And Overwatch 2 was still seen as an old game, because the sequel really changed almost nothing. Blizzard saw player counts dropping over the course of 6 months. So they put together a 3-piece combo to save the game. The game was going to get put on Steam, after spending its entire life on the Battle.net launcher. It's a terrible name and a bad launcher, but people tolerated it for a long time. It was time for a new start. And then, they announced that PvE was canceled, but they were releasing a few missions anyway. This is one of the most baffling failures I've ever seen in gaming. It's a complete own goal. I mean, it took over 2 years off from working on the original game just to come out with a sequel that had 3 heroes and a new map type. All that was under the guise of spending time on this new PvE stuff. This PvE stuff that they had apparently decided to cancel before they launched Overwatch 2. They just left everyone in flux for about a year. There's only so much grace people can give for this stuff. We'll get to the response in a second. Spoilers, it wasn't positive. But let's take a moment to answer why. How did they mess up so bad? Now, you could make a whole video out of this failure. It's a huge part of this book on Blizzard. I'm just going to do a short version here. The team behind Overwatch wanted to make an MMO to begin with. Remember what we talked about earlier with Titan? But when that failed, they pivoted to make Overwatch into a PvP shooter. As soon as Overwatch worked, they actually wanted to go back and make Titan again. Now, as it turns out, Titan was canceled for a reason. And to be fair, as they worked on Overwatch 2, there were a ton of internal issues. Shout out to Bobby Kotick and all that stuff with the Diddy people. At the end of the day, the PvE stuff they were making just wasn't very fun. We got a little taste of what it was because they threw out some missions when they announced the cancellation. They just gave us a piece of what they had been working on. It was some boring, basic campaign shooter gameplay. You're mowing down hordes of literal bots. Like, who would want to play this game? It feels like they completely missed who their actual player base was and decided instead to make a game for completely different people. Now, in a way, I kind of get it. The true casual Overwatch player moved on pretty quickly. There are tons of people who liked the game in 2016, but a lot of those didn't even make it to 2017. Maybe they would have liked a slower paced, more casual Overwatch. But from what they worked on, it just straight up didn't work. And so Blizzard wasted 2 years trying to make PvE work just to decide that it couldn't be done. Meaning they had to rush out all those changes to the real game just so people wouldn't abandon it. This led to the lowest point in Overwatch's history. At least the lowest point yet. Players were not happy with the whole reason for Overwatch 2 being canceled, and the sorry story missions they did release didn't help anything. I mean, why even have Overwatch 2 at this point? This all led to the Steam release of the game being pretty awful, to be honest. People flooded the game with negative reviews, and the general sentiment completely switched on the game. The term Overwatch player became more of a slur. Even with this colossal of a failure, this still somehow isn't the lowest point in Overwatch's history, although it's really close. Even after all this drama and all the drop balls, there was still no alternative to Overwatch. Paladins, Battleborn, Lawbreakers, Gigantic. I actually kind of like that game. Apex, Valorant, then later on Deadlock and Concord. There were a lot of hero shooters, but most of those died instantly. And the rest didn't actually play anything like Overwatch. So the faithful Overwatch players remained. Player counts actually went up over time again. This game was very much in its Stockholm Syndrome era. Everyone talking about Overwatch 2 complained constantly. And yet, people kept playing. Most of the time, games don't get as many chances as Overwatch. But what else were those players gonna play? And then, after weathering the storm, lasting all the way until 2024, Overwatch would finally hit its rock bottom. The true threat to end the game once and for all. A true rival. And that game was Concord. I mean, look at these inspired character designs, this sublime gameplay. Okay. Okay. I mean, I just kind of want to dunk on Concord because it's a true achievement to be shut down after 2 weeks. But it does show a good contrast. Every time a hero shooter came out to challenge Overwatch directly, it would completely flop. So when a Marvel hero shooter was announced, people had a right to be skeptical. I mean, Marvel Rivals came out just a couple months after Concord. How different could it be? Well, Rivals launch looked a lot like 2016 Overwatch launch. As it turns out, a lot of people like Marvel superheroes. So when you release a game that does a lot of the same casual fun that Overwatch had on launch before it turned into this, it draws a lot of players. Once again, a ton of people who didn't play shooters or didn't play hero shooters were starting to pick up Marvel Rivals. It was explosively popular. Now, competition is not always a bad thing, but in Overwatch's case, it looked like the beginning of the end. Finally, there was something else for Overwatch players to play, and something new for anyone who was interested in hero shooters. Overnight, people started switching over. You can even see it in the player numbers on Steam. We don't have hard numbers anywhere else, but you can see that Overwatch 2 was at its lowest point. When we thought it couldn't get any lower, it was even more Jover than we ever thought. After half a decade of mismanagement and poor decisions, it looked like we had hit the end of Overwatch. The game was too stagnant, too old, and too frustrating to last. Being supplanted by Marvel Rivals, a game that stole its bars and flow. But Rivals did some new things too. It's a third-person shooter rather than first-person, and third-person shooters are a lot easier for new players. Overwatch is a serious competitive game at this point with years of competitive balance. Rivals, on the other hand, is a more casual game with a lot of goofy characters. Characters like Jeff really took the world by storm in the same way that Bastion did when he first came out. Once again, sold their whole bars and flow. Why would people play Overwatch when Marvel Rivals is around? Except, within 1 year, we go from it's so over to we're so back. Fast forward to today, Overwatch 2 has caught up to Rivals again. It's got momentum again, and the most players it's ever had. Yeah. So what happened to bring Overwatch back from the brink? How could things turn around after a 5-year downward spiral? Well, really, the savior of Overwatch is also the source of its biggest downfall, Marvel Rivals. And here's why. A real competitor finally made the Overwatch devs realize that they could, actually change the game. They had done very little in the way of major changes since the move to 5v5 back in 2022. However, after Rivals came out, they started YOLOing out things that they had held off on for years, like hero bans and competitive. People have been asking for bans since Overwatch 1, and Blizzard said nah for various reasons since then. Then Rivals has bans, and all of a sudden, hero bans are on the table. There's a lot of other small changes they made in response for Rivals, but there are two big ones. Number 1, they redeemed the work from Overwatch 2 PvE. They added perks. Back when Blizzard announced Overwatch 2 and went over the PvE mode, the coolest thing they talked about were talents. They envisioned it as this whole complicated tech tree like you might see in an MMO. They were MMO devs after all. Or in a game like Borderlands. It would mean that every hero would have access to multiple upgrades to their abilities, so you could do stuff like Ryan's Earthshatter hitting in an area around him. Now, they didn't keep all of them, but a lot of this talent work got repurposed in Overwatch 2 with perks. Now, you can do things like throw Torp's turret onto walls. Okay, you could do that, but that got taken out. Oh, but you could also use Ana's ultimate, Nano Boost, and when you do, you get Nano Boosted yourself. Wait, that one's gone too. Whatever. There are a lot of really cool perks, and it leads to one of the biggest gameplay changes the game has ever seen. It adds a lot of dimensions to all heroes, and it injects some freshness that the game has been lacking. I mean, it has been 9 years. These are the kind of changes that get people interested in reinstalling the game and giving it another chance, and it gives them a major edge over Rivals. This is another way to balance characters and to let people choose what aspect of the power fantasy they're most interested in. The other big change they made was to add Stadium. Now, Overwatch is not a stranger to adding new game modes, but the majority of those are just a new map type for the same game. Push is a new game mode, but it still boils down to 2 teams of 5 duking it out with hero swapping and in first person. Stadium, on the other hand, is radically different. First of all, they stole third person from Marvel Rivals. In Stadium, you can play in first or third person as you please. And further, they basically went the whole way and brought the entire talent system back. Perks are cool, but in Stadium you can build your hero in very different ways. Like Reaper can use a mini version of his ult every time he teleports. And the game mode follows a multi-map progression. It plays a lot more like a MOBA, similar to the other Overwatch competitor we haven't really talked about, Deadlock. Deadlock's kind of its own thing and it's not technically out yet, but it still has at least as many players as Overwatch. But Deadlock is a straight up MOBA. Now, with Stadium, Overwatch has a competitor and they have a way to have basically 2 games in one, just like they wanted to do with PvE. Neither of these game modes really skew casual, but that's okay. Real competition was the best thing to happen to Overwatch. Not only did it force them to innovate and do new things again, it also gave the game its identity. Instead of just being the hero shooter, Overwatch is the hero shooter for competitive players. It leans more into strong hero designs and more skill-based gameplay, for the most part, that it built over the course of years. And it's paying off. For the first time in forever, Overwatch 2 doesn't feel like it's about to die. With 5v5, perks, Stadium, hero bans, multiple new game modes, and a host of new heroes, Overwatch 2 has risen from the ashes and finally feels like a sequel. Thanks for watching.